Hi, I'm James McGuire, and today we're talking about why companies need to rethink their approach to security and how a zero trust strategy can pay off. To discuss that, I'm joined by Armon Dadgar, CTO and co-founder of HashiCorp. Armon, very good to have you with us today.
Oh, my pleasure to be here. Thanks so much, James, for making the time.
Sure. I think it's interesting. I think about HashiCorp as it's the toolbox for the cloud. There's some open source tools, software tools. There's some commercial software tools. It's a freemium model. Correct me if I'm wrong about any of that, but beyond those bare facts, there's sort of an aura around HashiCorp, like, ooh, it's HashiCorp. And I'm thinking, if Armon Dadgar went out to dinner in Silicon Valley, he might get a better table because he's the co-founder of HashiCorp. I mean, HashiCorp. So, I mean, am I making that up, or tell me what is it? Is that aura? Is that just in my mind, or what is that all about?
Well, so far it hasn't materialized into a better table, but
I'm sorry to hear that. When you go to Bucks, I know that like the big Silicon Valley, venture capital plays Bucks and people do deals there. When you go to Bucks, they don't like, oh, Armon is here, let's do a deal.
not yet.
Okay, all
But
right.
I think you're right on the developer aura piece for sure, and I think that's just come from in some sense, if you go to like the inner beating heart of the company, has always been focused on open source,
Mhm.
focused on the practitioner and the end user, focused on building tools that we wanted to use. So like, me and Mitchell, in some sense, the genesis of the whole company was, we felt like there wasn't good tools that we wanted to use as practitioners. So we said, let's go build tools for ourselves. Right. And I
Uh-huh.
think that
Okay.
focus on the end user, the craftsmanship of the tools is, I think, what's led to a bit of that aura.
Hmm. Why sometimes I wonder why there's a hole in the market. For example, you are filling a hole in the market, but why aren't, for example, the hyperscalers getting out there and offering tons of tools like this, and why are they leaving it to HashiCorp to do this?
It's an interesting question. And so actually fun trivia fact. I used to work at Amazon. So
Oh, okay.
way back, 2009 when they were still tiny. And I remember being there when they first introduced CloudFormation, their version of their infrastructure as code provisioning tool.
Right.
And I was sort of shocked when they were doing the internal presentation. I was like, the usability of this thing is kind of like, do we really want to put this in front of users?
A lot of a
One
lot of the AWS stuff is like that. My personal opinion, but go ahead. You don't need to agree or disagree with that, but please go on.
yeah, exactly. No comment on that one. But
Right.
I think I think the real challenge for them is they're in the business ultimately of selling basically compute, storage, and network, right? They sell you
Right.
power. And so in some sense, like the management tooling, the layers on top of that, like they're free. CloudFormation is a free tool. All their management tooling is effectively given away for free.
Hmm.
So it's not really a revenue driver for them. It's not really a focus area in the same way like net new compute services are.
Right.
Versus I think for us, we're like, hey, this is our product. This is our baby. We care about making it a great experience rather than it just being kind of, whatever minimum basic thing. So I
Yeah.
think that's part of, I think the difference is just like, they sell power, we kind of sell power lines.
Yeah. Okay, that makes perfect sense. Oh, well, let's talk about security and zero trust. I mean, first, as the idea of cloud and security is really, I find a very interesting topic in that there was a sense that in the old days, several years back, like, oh, cloud is, we're nervous about cloud. It's not as safe. But now it seems like, cloud is actually safer than some of the older systems. Do you agree with that? And if you do, like, why is cloud safer than some of the older legacy systems?
Well, I think I agree and disagree
Okay.
simultaneously.
All right.
And when I
Yep.
say I agree, I think if we think about security, it's always a multi-layer challenge, right? And so if you talk about, let's keep it really simple, physical security.
Hmm.
Amazon is going to do a much better job physically securing their data center than a
Right.
random, mom and pop shop running in a colo or whatever it is, right? So if you
Right.
think about it at that layer, you're like, do you trust that Amazon has better physical security at their premise than you would? Yeah, obviously. They're
Sure.
running at way
Sure.
bigger scale. What about like their ability to patch issues at a hardware level? Yeah, they're doing it at a million times bigger scale than you would do.
Hmm.
Operating system level issues. Yeah, they have deeper relationships with all the vendors than, so I think as you move up the stack, that's where things start getting blurry, right? It's really obviously, yes, it's better with the cloud at the bottom. But as you move towards the top, you get into kind of this shared responsibility model. And I
Ah.
think that's where this paradigm has changed a little bit, where, on premise, we used to think, hey, I protect my four walls, I protect all the traffic coming over the firewall, the
Right.
inside is safe and secure. Great,
Sure.
we've solved it. Versus in a cloud world, there's no front door, right? Traffic is coming and going from everywhere. You're
Right.
connecting your cloud to your on-prem, to your other cloud vendor. And so I think understanding the patterns is becoming a lot more complicated. Securing those traffic flows is becoming a lot more complicated. And the fact that it's a shared responsibility model means there's a lot more customers have to think about.
Work with, I think I understand that. Work with me a little bit when you talk about moving up the stack and they have shared responsibility. It is less secure because there's more sort of portal, so to speak, where information is going in and out. Is that what's making it less secure?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think the way I would think about it is, before if you had one front door to your house, right, and there's only so many guests coming and going, you kind of know them all by name. You're like, okay, that's something.
Right.
Once you've scaled up and there's, dozens of doors, thousands of people are coming and going, you don't recognize, the flow of traffic in the same way.
Hmm.
Securing that just gets to be a lot harder, right? And the ways that we approach it is a lot more challenging. And so I think that sits at this kind of fundamental shift towards zero trust is like, are you worried about just securing a single front door and then trusting that everything on the inside is confidential and secure and high trust? Or are you really thinking about what are the layers of defense? What if someone who shouldn't be on my network does get into my network, right? What if a
Hmm.
SolarWinds,
Hmm.
situation occurs? What are my
Hmm.
layers of defense that exist now? I think that's where things start to get, into the zero trust realm and get, more challenging.
Well, let's sort of dive into that idea. I mean, there's that classic, castle and moat approach. Is sort of in theory a single choke point. Things outside the moat are, dangerous and evil, and things inside the castle are probably okay. But it seems like it's not working like it's used to, like it used to. Why is that not as effective in today's world?
So I think this, I think there's two things to it, right? I think what makes it more challenging in the new world is in Castle and Moat, what made it work is you had that one drawbridge, right? There was one point of ingress, egress. I think
Hmm.
as you're going to cloud, you have many more, right? And then layer on
Right.
top of that, everyone's working from home. You have everyone from 1,000 different places VPNing into your corporate network. So you just have
Hmm.
so many more points of ingress and egress now into these networks versus the
Gotcha.
castle had that well-defined drawbridge where the traffic came through. That's one
Right.
piece of it. I think the second piece, and I'll call this a dose of reality, which is the castle and moat world made a key set of assumptions, which was one, 100% of those bad actors are stopped at that front door. And so
Right.
the assumption baked into that was that my firewall rules were perfect, that I never had an unpatched vulnerability or dependency anywhere in my stack, that there was
Right.
never a zero-day exploit, being used in the wild. And
Right.
all of those were bad assumptions, right? Like as we know, all of those
Very.
things are true.
Well, plus, of course, some of the danger comes from rogue actors inside the castle, so to speak. I mean, that's the other
Bingo.
problem. Yeah.
Bingo. And that was always the second threat was like, it's not necessarily that you might have an employee who's malicious actively, that's possible, but more likely they were subject to a phishing attack or a malware attack. And so their credentials been compromised and they're acting maliciously, not knowing it, right? But their
Right.
credentials are being used in that way.
Right. Yeah, we get those emails from, Nigerian princes. If you only send us your email and everything is, you're going to make $1 million.
Exactly.
All right. So we hear the term zero trust a lot these days. I can't believe that amount of times that term comes up. I hear about zero trust all the time. Why is it suddenly so much in the spotlight? What is zero trust and why is it so big these days?
So I think it's been a thing the industry I think has been agitating for a few years. But like with a lot of these things, there's kind of a change resistance. And so I think the catalyst, I think the watershed in some sense was SolarWind, right? I think every
Hmm.
once in a while there's these sort of watershed moments where the whole industry kind of wakes up and is like, actually, maybe we have to change what we're doing. And I think
Hmm.
SolarWinds was a great moment, great in some sense, right? Great in the sense of everyone
In the wake
recognizing,
up. Yeah.
hey, the fact that these things will happen and they will continue to happen, great, software is not going to be perfect. How do I mitigate the impact of that? Well, I shouldn't have these wide open networks. That's what allowed the attacker to move laterally and compromise a bunch of other systems.
Hmm.
So I think that was the watershed and why we're talking about it now. In terms of like, what is the implication of it? How do we actually do this transition? Our view is that it's actually at the core, the idea is pretty simple, right? All you're doing is you're moving from a model where you say, hey, I trust my private network. It means you're authenticated. It means you're authorized. To I don't. Being on my private network doesn't mean you're authenticated, doesn't mean you're authorized. It might be the
Right.
same as you connecting from the public internet.
Sure.
Like, that's it. It's that one assumption that we're switching. It sounds very simple, right? I mean, conceptually it is. The devil's in the detail in terms of how do we get it done. But I think that's really the conceptual shift we have to make, which is like, stop thinking about a public private network It's just the network and it's all untrusted.
Hmm. Well, then what are the special vulnerabilities in zero trust? I mean, I think sometimes people say, oh, zero trust, we're going to really move ahead. We're going to be secure once we install zero trust. But what are the what are the vulnerabilities? What should people worry about even if they do implement zero trust?
Yeah, I mean, like everything, nothing is a perfect silver bullet, right? So I think what zero trust will do is in the ways that we implement it, our view is there's kind of, I'll call it 4 pillars of zero trust, right?
Okay.
The first 2 pillars are about establishing identity. So pillar 1 is I need to understand human identity. So this might be I'm using a tool like Okta or I'm using Azure Active Directory and I have some way of understanding, hey, this is Armon, he's a developer, he works for me.
Hmm.
The second kind of pillar is machine identity. I need to understand this thing's my web server, this thing's my database, this thing is my API service.
Hmm.
So that becomes the kind of the 2 pillars that establish, great, I have an understanding of what this thing is on my network. From that, then it's like, how do I govern the machine to machine workflow? So if my web server wants to connect to my database, how do I govern that? And then there's the human to machine, which is great. Armon, the developer, is trying to connect to my web server. Should that be allowed? So to us, those
Hmm.
are the 4 pillars. And so the risks that, to your kind of question, exist. And okay, well, how would I attack each of those, right? Like, is there a way I could poison the human directory, right? Could I
Hmm.
elevate Armon from a developer to a super admin? Well,
Right.
what would that change in terms of my access, right? Could I poison the machine identity instead of being a low level web server? Can I upgrade to being a highly privileged, database, let's say, right?
Okay.
And then in the other 2 systems, if there was flaws in their implementation, would that allow me to bypass the controls that are either machine to machine or human to machine, right?
Right.
So I think each of these things, I think those 4 pillars are necessary to make this transition, but it doesn't mean that the implementations of those is going to be perfect, right?
Right. Right.
Like everything, like all
It's
software.
it's about the execution, not just the theory, right?
Exactly.
What about the idea of containers? I mean, clearly containers are moving cloud forward in a very big way. Containers are definitely here to stay. What are the security concerns with containers? I mean, what worries you there in that world?
Oh boy, a bunch of things. I think one is people have sort of, I'll call it, ignored some of the supply chain hazards
Hmm.
that come with containers. So actually, there was a great study done by some university security researchers showing that if you went to sort of these popular open Docker registries on the internet and scanned the 1,000 most popular images, some crazy percentage, right? Don't quote me exactly, but it's like 80+% have known security vulnerabilities.
Wow. Okay.
And
Yeah.
some of it's not malicious. It's just like, oh, there's an out of date library in it. That library has a known issue. You're inheriting that problem. Some of it is actively malicious, where people are looking at, hey, this is a popular software. I'm going to upload that and I'm going to embed some malware in it. So if someone downloads this thing, I get slipstreamed into their network.
Right.
And so I think the ease of containers getting posted online, downloaded, easily redistributed, opens you up to a bunch of these kind of supply chain risks, right? And I think
Right.
businesses need to be really disciplined in terms of how containers get built, how they get managed, how they get deployed, to make sure they're not just downloading random things from the internet, right? So there's a big surface area of risk there.
Isn't there a vendor out there who says, "Hey, if you use our container management system, you'll never have that worry"? Is there not a container management system out there that prevents that problem?
There's many, right? And in some sense, I think it's more about the organizational discipline of how you allow your developers to consume it than it is about the specific vendor. Because all of the cloud providers have their own native container registries. You can use them. Solutions from Artifactory, right? So there's a bunch of solutions out there. That's the technology is not the problem. It's more of the discipline and the cultural training. Like I think as a development community, we've handed a bunch of folks shiny new toys. We
Hmm.
haven't really educated them on the risks.
Right. But what about the future of cybersecurity in the multi-cloud world? And to me, I think it's sort of this way to exponentially increase the problems, because of course we're not using one cloud only. I mean, I think I read this thing recently where companies are using on average 3.2 clouds. And that means that there's a lot of things coming and going. Certainly multi-cloud and the idea of distributed computing is only going to grow. What do you see when you say, like, when you look at, say, 2025 or so, and the concept of cybersecurity in this distributed multi-cloud world? What trends would you predict, and or how could someone be prepared for that?
Yeah, no, it's great. I think what we end up seeing is across the industries that we talk to, across the geographies we sort of operate in, multi-cloud is, it's firmly here to stay. If we're at 3.2 now, if I had to predict what we're at in, 2026, as you said, we're
Yep.
probably averaging, 4.2 clouds or 5.2 clouds. So I think
Right.
that's the direction we're going on. People are just going to have more, not less.
Sure.
So I think the challenge then becomes, okay, if I'm going to have this ever increasing sort of technology portfolio, how do I do it sanely? I think what
Right.
most customers are looking for is some layer of, great, if I have 5 different cloud vendors, what's the layer above that that's going to give me a consistency of identity, a consistency of network policy, a consistency of how I manage this stuff?
Hmm.
Certainly that's a space HashiCorp plays in, right? We spend a lot of time with, tools like Terraform about consistent provisioning, tools like Vault, consistent machine identity, tools like Console, consistent networking across the clouds.
Mhm.
So I think there's a whole set of solutions that we focus on, but there's other vendors like Datadog. I think a huge thing for them is, how do I give you visibility, right? If I'm operating
Hmm.
in 5 clouds, I want a
Mhm.
consistent way to have visibility across all of that, right?
Hmm. Okay. Yeah.
So yeah, I think there's a whole host of infrastructure vendors that are filling that kind of multi-cloud gap, because I think customers acknowledge, yeah, I'm going to do business with all the vendors, but yeah, I'm going to want Confluent to give me a consistent way to do messaging across it. I want Datadog for observability. I want HashiCorp to do my infrastructure management. So I think that's going to be the hole that needs to be filled.
Well, I think sort of, hearing you talk, I reminded of the idea of this holy grail of cloud and multi-cloud is that someday there would be actually a single pane of glass that someone would, an administrator could administer his or her multi-cloud, world from this single pane of glass. It seems unlikely because of the different ways the providers are working. But will we ever have this single pane of glass to really manage all this, or is that too distant, or will that ever happen?
I think you'll have multiple panes of glass, but I think you'll look at it through the lenses of those different, I'll call it kind of like solution areas, right? So it's like, if
Hmm.
I want to understand, hey, what's my application performance? Datadog could be my single pane of glass. I can go to Datadog and say, great, I can understand my app performance across Amazon, Azure, on-premise. It gives me that consistent observability window. But
Hmm.
am I going to use Datadog to do my infrastructure management? Probably not. I might use,
Right.
HashiCorp's Terraform for that. We might be
Hmm.
your single pane of glass of like, show me all my infrastructure in Amazon or Azure. But are we going to then be your single pane for what your source code is? No, probably not. You're going to use GitHub or GitLab, so you might have a
Right.
different pane for that. So
Hmm.
I don't think there's going to be one pane of glass to rule it all. I think that surface area is so enormous. But I
Hmm.
think you will have those standardizations on what we consider kind of the key layers of infrastructure, because otherwise it becomes unmanageable, right? If I have to have 10 different ways of doing it times every environment, it
Right.
becomes just a complete nightmare.
Yeah. No, I think there's probably vendors out there dreaming of that now, and maybe they will, as you see, it could be a number of approaches, but I still think there's a couple of vendors thinking, oh no, no, we're gonna have that one. It's
The
not
one
like the
super
cloud
pain.
app. Yeah. Who knows?
Yeah.
If they ever do get that in the corner of that market, that is a heck of an offering.
Yeah, I
At
think
any
the
rate,
challenge is just
please go
keeping
ahead.
pace too, right? Just given how dynamic the cloud
Right.
market is now, it's like there's so much investment happening. There's so much dynamicism of new services, new companies, new vendors. So,
Right.
I think it would be it's an ambitious goal, but certainly not impossible.
Armon, I think you've said it. Thank you very much for sharing your expertise. I definitely learned something. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thanks so much, James.